Prince William stepped out of the black car and looked around the quiet street in Birmingham. The houses were small and close together. Some had bright flowers in their tiny front gardens, while others looked tired and forgotten. Kate walked beside him, wearing a simple blue dress that would not make anyone feel uncomfortable. They were not here for a big fancy event with photographers and speeches. Today was different. The community center stood at the corner of two busy streets. It was an old brick building with large windows that needed cleaning. A small sign by the door said "Welcome" in 5 different languages. William noticed how some people were already gathered outside. They stood in separate small groups. The older white families stayed near the left side of the entrance. The younger immigrant families with children remained closer to the right side. A few teenagers sat on the steps looking at their phones and ignoring everyone else. Kate saw the invisible lines that divided these neighbors. She had grown up in a comfortable village where most people looked and lived like her family. But over the years of royal visits, she had learned to notice things that others might miss. The way some mothers pulled their children closer when certain people walked by. How some elderly residents crossed the street to avoid talking to newcomers. The polite smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. Inside the community center, the divisions became even more clear. Long tables were set up with sandwiches and tea. Families had arranged themselves exactly like they did outside. The Somali mothers sat together speaking their own language while their children played quietly nearby. The Pakistani families gathered around one table sharing homemade sweets. The elderly British residents who had lived here for decades stayed near the tea station, talking about how different everything looked now. William walked slowly through the room, watching and listening. He heard fragments of conversation in English mixed with other languages he could not understand. Children switched between languages as easily as changing television channels. Their parents looked tired from working long hours at jobs that paid very little. Some of the older residents seemed lonely, even surrounded by so many people. Kate noticed a young mother sitting alone near the window. The woman looked about her own age, but her eyes held a sadness that spoke of difficult experiences. She was trying to help her small son with what looked like homework, while keeping an eye on a baby sleeping in a worn stroller. Kate could see the woman glancing around the room as if hoping someone might talk to her, but not knowing how to start a conversation. At another table, an elderly man sat by himself, slowly eating a sandwich. His clothes were clean but old-fashioned. He kept looking toward the groups of families, but made no move to join any conversation. William recognized the expression on his face. It was the same look he had seen on his grandfather's face sometimes. The look of someone who felt invisible in a world that seemed to be moving too fast. The official schedule said William and Kate should spend 15 minutes meeting local leaders, then move on to the next planned stop. But something about this room made them both want to stay longer. They could feel the loneliness that filled the spaces between the different groups. Everyone was being polite, but no one was really connecting. Kate touched William's arm and pointed toward a corner where several children from different families were starting to play together with some toys. The adults watched nervously as their children mixed freely without the careful boundaries their parents maintained. The children did not seem to notice or care about the differences that kept their families apart. William made a decision that would surprise his security team. Instead of following the planned schedule, he walked over to the elderly man eating alone. Kate went toward the young mother by the window. They had no special training for this moment. They only had their instinct that real change started with real conversations between real people. Neither of them knew that this simple choice to sit down and listen would begin something much bigger than they could imagine. They just knew that in this room full of neighbors who barely knew each other, there had to be a better way for people to connect. The foundation for everything that would follow was built in that moment when they chose understanding over schedule. William walked over to the elderly man who sat alone at the corner table. The man looked up with surprise when he saw the prince approaching. His weathered hands shook slightly as he tried to stand up to show respect. William gently touched his shoulder and said, "Please keep sitting. I would like to join you if that is okay." The man's name was Tom Harrison. He had lived in this neighborhood for 60 years. He watched it change from a place where everyone knew each other's names to a community where he felt like a stranger. Tom told William about his late wife, Mary, who used to organize street parties where all the neighbors would bring food and children would play together until dark. Now he barely recognized the faces on his own street. Tom's voice became softer as he shared his daily routine. He would wake up early and make tea for one instead of two. He would walk to the corner shop where the young clerk barely looked up from his phone. The new families moved in and out so quickly that he stopped trying to introduce himself. He felt invisible most days, like he was a ghost from an earlier time that no one wanted to remember. Meanwhile, Kate sat down next to the young mother by the window. The woman introduced herself as Amara. She had come to England 3 years ago from Somalia with her 2 children after her husband died in the Civil War. Kate listened as Amara explained how different everything was from what she had expected. Back home, she had been a doctor working in a busy hospital. Here, she cleaned office buildings at night because her medical degree was not recognized. Amara's English was good, but she spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. She told Kate about the shame she felt when her 8-year-old son Ahmed had to help her read letters from the school. The other mothers at school pickup looked so confident talking about homework and after-school activities. Amara wanted to join their conversations, but worried they would judge her accent or think she was not educated enough. The hardest part, Amara said, was the loneliness. In Somalia, families lived close together and neighbors shared everything. Women would gather in the evenings to drink tea and talk about their children. Here she worked when others were sleeping and slept when others were awake. Her children were doing well in school, but they were forgetting their Somali language, and sometimes she felt like she was losing them to this new world. As William listened to Tom, he learned about the man's pride in his small garden behind his house. Tom grew vegetables that reminded him of his childhood when his grandfather taught him about soil and seasons. But his back was getting weaker and the garden was becoming too much work. He missed having someone to share the tomatoes and beans with like he used to do with Mary. Kate discovered that Amara spent her free time trying to study for medical exams so she could work as a doctor again. But studying alone in English was difficult, and she had no money for proper courses. She dreamed of helping sick people again, instead of emptying trash cans and cleaning toilets. Her children never complained, but she knew they deserved a mother who felt proud of her work. Both conversations revealed something important that the official reports about this community had missed. The problems here were not really about money or jobs or housing. The real problem was that good people who wanted to help each other did not know how to connect. Tom had gardening knowledge and time to share. Amara had medical training and a desire to contribute, but invisible walls kept them separate. William realized that Tom was not unfriendly to the new families because of prejudice. He was simply afraid of saying the wrong thing or seeming like he did not belong in his own neighborhood anymore. Amara was not unfriendly to her British neighbors because she felt superior. She was scared they would reject her if they knew about her struggles. As the afternoon continued, other similar stories emerged around the room. The teenager whose loud music annoyed neighbors was actually drowning out his parents fighting at home. The mother who seemed rude at school events was working 2 jobs and exhausted all the time. The elderly woman who appeared unfriendly was becoming deaf, but too embarrassed to admit it. Each conversation showed William and Kate that the divisions in this community were built on misunderstanding rather than real differences. Everyone wanted the same basic things: safety for their families, respect from their neighbors, a chance to contribute something meaningful. The tragedy was that they were all struggling with similar challenges, but facing them alone. Something beautiful began to happen in the community center as William and Kate continued their conversations. Other people in the room started to notice that the prince and princess were not just making polite small talk. They were really listening to Tom and Amara with genuine interest and care. This made other neighbors curious about what stories were being shared. Kate had an idea. She gently asked Amara if she would like to meet Mrs. Chen, who was sitting at the next table. Mrs. Chen was a retired school teacher who had moved to England from Hong Kong 40 years ago. She looked lonely too, sitting by herself with a cup of tea that had gone cold. Kate made the introduction, carefully explaining that both women had experience helping children learn. At first, Amara felt nervous. She worried that Mrs. Chen might think less of her for working as a cleaner instead of using her medical training. But Mrs. Chen's kind eyes and gentle smile made her feel welcome. When Mrs. Chen learned that Amara was struggling to help her son Ahmed with his homework, she immediately offered to help. Mrs. Chen explained that she had been looking for ways to stay useful after retiring and missed working with children. The two women discovered they had more in common than they expected. Both had left their home countries to build better lives. Both understood what it felt like to have people judge them for their accents or appearance. Both loved their children more than anything and wanted them to succeed in school. Within minutes, they were sharing photos of their families and making plans for Mrs. Chen to visit Amara's home to meet Ahmed. Meanwhile, William was working similar magic with Tom. He introduced the elderly man to Marcus, who was a young father sitting nearby looking overwhelmed. Marcus had recently moved to the neighborhood with his wife and baby daughter. He worked long hours at a warehouse and came home too tired to do much besides feed his family and fall asleep. William learned that Marcus had been trying to grow vegetables in the tiny patch of dirt behind his rental house, but nothing would grow properly. Tom's eyes lit up when he heard about Marcus's gardening troubles. He began sharing advice about soil preparation and plant spacing. Marcus listened with genuine interest, asking questions about when to plant different vegetables and how to deal with pests naturally. Tom offered to show Marcus his own garden, which was just 2 streets away. He explained that he had too many vegetables for one person and would be happy to share his harvest in exchange for some help with the heavier garden work. Marcus was amazed to learn that this friendly, knowledgeable man lived so close, but they had never met. Kate noticed other connections starting to form around the room. A teenage girl named Sarah was helping an elderly gentleman figure out how to use his new smartphone. The man, Mr. Patel, was trying to video call his grandson in India, but could not remember which buttons to press. Sarah showed him patiently and even helped him save his grandson's number properly. In return, Mr. Patel told Sarah about his work as a young engineer in India and how he had helped build bridges and roads. Sarah was studying engineering at college and had never met a real engineer before. She asked him questions about his projects, and Mr. Patel felt proud to share his knowledge with someone who was genuinely interested. William and Kate stepped back to watch these natural connections forming. They realized they had not forced anyone to talk or created artificial situations. Instead, they had simply created a safe space where people felt comfortable sharing their real selves. When people heard authentic stories instead of making assumptions based on appearance or accent, they discovered unexpected common ground. The community center felt different now. The invisible walls between groups were starting to dissolve. Children who had been playing separately began including others in their games. Parents started conversations about school and work instead of just nodding politely. Elderly residents shared stories about the neighborhood's history, while newcomers asked questions about local traditions. Kate watched as Amara and Mrs. Chen exchanged phone numbers and made plans to meet again soon. William saw Tom and Marcus shaking hands and agreeing to visit Tom's garden the following weekend. These were not big dramatic changes, but small seeds of friendship that could grow into something beautiful if given the right care and attention. The royal couple realized they had discovered something important. People wanted to connect with their neighbors, but they needed help breaking through the barriers of fear and misunderstanding. Sometimes all it took was one person willing to make the first introduction, or ask the right question to open doors that had been closed for years. 3 weeks later, William and Kate returned to the same community center with a new idea. They had been thinking about the connections they witnessed during their first visit and wanted to create more opportunities for neighbors to share their stories. Instead of a formal royal event with speeches and photo opportunities, they planned something completely different. They called it a story circle. The idea was simple. People would sit in a comfortable circle and take turns sharing something meaningful about their lives. There were no complicated rules, just a few basic guidelines. Everyone would listen without interrupting. No one would judge or give advice unless asked. Each person could share as much or as little as they felt comfortable with. Kate was nervous as people began arriving at the community center that evening. What if no one wanted to participate? What if the conversations became arguments? What if people thought the whole idea was silly? She had spent the past 3 weeks wondering if she and William were making a mistake by trying something so personal and informal. But as neighbors filled the room, Kate noticed something encouraging. Tom arrived early carrying a basket of vegetables from his garden. Amara came with Mrs. Chen and her son Ahmed, who was excited to show off his improved homework grades. Marcus brought his wife Lisa, who was curious to meet the man who had been teaching her husband so much about gardening. William started the circle in an unexpected way. Instead of talking about his royal duties or charitable work, he shared something personal and vulnerable. He told the group about becoming a father and how scared he had been about making mistakes. He talked about the pressure he felt to be perfect and how that pressure sometimes made him feel lonely even when surrounded by people. His honesty surprised everyone in the room. Here was a future king admitting that he sometimes felt uncertain and afraid just like everyone else. This gave other people permission to be honest about their own struggles instead of pretending everything was fine. Kate followed by sharing her experience of trying to fit into royal life while staying true to herself. She talked about feeling overwhelmed as a new mother and worrying that she was not doing enough to help people. She admitted that she sometimes felt more comfortable talking to children than adults because children were more honest about their feelings. The vulnerability from William and Kate created a safe atmosphere that encouraged others to open up. Tom spoke about his grief after losing his wife and how empty his house felt without her laughter. But he also shared his joy in teaching Marcus about gardening and how good it felt to have someone to share his vegetables with again. Amara talked about her struggles with English and her shame about working as a cleaner when she used to be a doctor. But she also shared her pride in her children, who were doing well in school, and her gratitude to Mrs. Chen for helping Ahmed with his homework. She was studying again with Mrs. Chen's encouragement and hoped to take her medical exam soon. Marcus opened up about his fears of not being a good enough provider for his family. Working at the warehouse was hard on his body, and he worried about getting injured and not being able to work. But learning to grow vegetables from Tom made him feel more secure about feeding his family and gave him a peaceful hobby after stressful workdays. Mrs. Chen surprised everyone by sharing her own story of immigration and the discrimination she faced as a young teacher. She talked about students who made fun of her accent and parents who questioned whether she was qualified to teach their children. But she also shared her joy in seeing those same students succeed and her current happiness in helping on to learn. Each story revealed common human experiences that connected people across their different backgrounds. Everyone had felt scared about not being good enough. Everyone had experienced loss and loneliness. Everyone wanted to feel useful and valued. Everyone worried about their children's futures. The teenagers in the group shared their struggles with feeling caught between their parents' traditional values and their friends' modern attitudes. The elderly residents talked about feeling invisible in a rapidly changing world. The working parents discussed their exhaustion from trying to balance jobs and family responsibilities. But along with the struggles, people also shared their hopes and dreams, their pride in small accomplishments, their appreciation for unexpected kindness, their love for their families and communities. The stories created bridges of understanding that crossed lines of age, culture, religion, and economic status. By the end of the evening, the room felt completely different from that first visit 3 weeks earlier. People were sitting closer together. Conversations continued even after the formal circle ended. Phone numbers were exchanged and plans were made for future meetings. William and Kate realized they had witnessed something powerful. When people felt safe to share their authentic experiences, instead of hiding behind polite social masks, they discovered they had much more in common than they had imagined. The differences that seemed so important from a distance became much less significant when viewed through the lens of shared humanity. The success of the story circle in Birmingham spread faster than William and Kate had expected. Word traveled through social media, local newspapers, and most importantly, through the neighbors who had participated. People began asking if similar circles could be started in their own communities. Requests came from Manchester, Liverpool, Cardiff, and dozens of smaller towns across the country. William and Kate realized they had discovered something much bigger than a single community event. They had found a simple method that could help people connect anywhere. But they also knew that they could not personally visit every neighborhood that wanted to try story circles. They needed to find a way to teach others how to create these meaningful gatherings. Kate spent weeks documenting exactly what made their story circles work. She wrote down every detail she could remember. The importance of comfortable seating arranged in a circle where everyone could see each other's faces. The need for simple refreshments that people could share. The value of starting each gathering with leaders, sharing something personal and vulnerable. She also noted the ground rules that seemed essential. No interrupting when someone was speaking. No giving advice unless specifically asked. No sharing someone else's story outside the circle without permission. No judging or criticizing what people chose to share. These rules created safety that allowed people to be honest about their real experiences. William focused on training community leaders who could facilitate story circles in their own areas. He worked with social workers, teachers, religious leaders, and volunteer coordinators. He taught them how to start conversations that went deeper than surface small talk. How to help shy people feel comfortable sharing. How to redirect conversations if they became arguments. How to handle emotional moments when people cried or became upset. The training sessions revealed how hungry people were for genuine connection. Community leaders from different backgrounds all reported the same problem. Their neighborhoods had people living close together physically but far apart emotionally. Families moved frequently. Work schedules kept people busy. Technology made it easy to avoid face-to-face conversations. Many residents felt lonely even in crowded places. Kate developed materials specifically for parents who wanted to use story circle principles with their children. She created simple conversation starters that helped families talk about feelings, fears, and dreams instead of just homework and chores. Questions like what made you feel proud today, or what worry is taking up space in your mind, or if you could change one thing about our family, what would it be? The children's version of story circles became popular in schools. Teachers found that students who shared personal stories with classmates became more understanding of each other's differences. Bullying decreased when children learned about the struggles their classmates faced at home. Academic performance improved when students felt emotionally connected to their school community. William began working with local government officials who were impressed by the measurable changes happening in communities with active story circles. Crime rates dropped in several neighborhoods after circles had been meeting for 6 months. School attendance improved when parents and teachers built relationships through shared storytelling. Hospital patient satisfaction scores increased after medical staff participated in empathy training based on story circle principles. The royal couple used their public platform not to lecture people about unity, but to provide practical tools anyone could use. They appeared on television programs demonstrating how to start conversations that built bridges instead of walls. They wrote articles for magazines explaining how small acts of listening could transform entire communities. Kate partnered with libraries to host story circles that brought together people who might never meet otherwise. Teenagers shared tables with senior citizens. Recent immigrants sat beside families who had lived in the area for generations. People with disabilities joined conversations with their able-bodied neighbors. Each gathering revealed the rich diversity of experiences that existed within every community. William worked with businesses to adapt story circle methods for workplace teams. Companies found that employees who knew each other's personal stories collaborated more effectively and with less conflict. Managers who understood their workers' challenges outside the office became more flexible and supportive. Customer service improved when staff felt heard and valued by their employers. The model spread beyond England to other countries. Community organizations in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand began hosting their own story circles. International development groups used the method to help divided communities in post-conflict areas learn to live together peacefully. The simple idea of people sitting in circles, sharing their authentic experiences, was creating positive changes around the world. Kate and William began receiving letters from people whose lives had been changed by participating in story circles. Elderly residents wrote about feeling less lonely and more valued by their neighbors. Immigrant families shared stories of finally feeling welcomed and understood. Parents described improved relationships with their children. Teachers reported more harmonious classrooms where students supported each other through difficulties. But perhaps the most meaningful feedback came from the original participants in Birmingham. Tom and Marcus had become close friends who worked together in an expanded community garden that now supplied fresh vegetables to dozens of families. Amara had passed her medical exams with Mr. Chen's tutoring help and was working as a nurse while studying to have her doctor credentials recognized. The community center had become a hub of activity where neighbors gathered regularly for various story circles focused on different topics and age groups. Not everyone welcomed William and Kate's approach to building community connections. Traditional supporters of the royal family complained that the prince and princess should focus on ceremonial duties like ribbon cutting and formal state dinners instead of getting involved in social work. Some critics argued that wealthy, privileged people could never truly understand the struggles of ordinary families living paycheck to paycheck. The harshest criticism came after a particularly difficult story circle session in Manchester. The gathering had started well with residents sharing personal experiences about unemployment, housing problems, and family stress. But when the conversation turned to political topics, the room became tense. Two participants began arguing loudly about immigration policies while others took sides or sat in uncomfortable silence. Kate felt her heart racing as voices grew louder and people started pointing fingers at each other. Her security team stepped forward ready to escort her and William out of the building. This was exactly the kind of situation that royal handlers had warned them about. Getting involved in controversial community issues could damage their reputation and create problems for the monarchy. But instead of leaving, Kate made a choice that surprised everyone in the room. She remained seated and spoke in a calm, quiet voice that somehow commanded attention even amid the chaos. She acknowledged that people had different opinions about complicated issues. She admitted that she and William did not have easy answers to problems that affected millions of lives. Then Kate redirected the conversation away from abstract political debates toward personal human experiences. She asked each person who had been arguing to share something they were worried about for their own family. Slowly, the anger in the room transformed into something more productive. People began talking about their fears for their children's futures, their concerns about elderly parents, their struggles to find stable work. The session revealed an important lesson. Empathy did not require agreement on every political issue. People could have completely different opinions about government policies while still recognizing each other's humanity. The goal was not to eliminate all disagreements, but to help people see beyond their differences to the shared values underneath. William learned to address criticism about his privileged background by acknowledging his limitations while emphasizing his commitment to learning from others. When reporters asked how someone born into wealth could understand poverty, he admitted that he could not fully comprehend experiences he had never lived. But he argued that this made listening even more important, not less. He began sharing examples of how story circles had changed his own understanding. Meeting Tom had taught him about the loneliness that many elderly people faced. Listening to Amara had opened his eyes to the challenges immigrants encountered even when they had valuable skills to contribute. These conversations had made him a better person and a more effective future leader. Kate faced different challenges when working with women's groups. Some participants questioned whether a princess who had married into wealth could relate to mothers struggling to pay rent and buy groceries. Kate responded by sharing her own experiences of self-doubt and anxiety, especially during her early years in the royal spotlight when every outfit and expression was analyzed by critics. She talked honestly about the pressure she felt to be perfect and how that pressure sometimes made her feel inadequate as a mother and wife. She admitted that having money solved some problems but created others, like never knowing if people liked her for herself or for her status. Her vulnerability helped other women see her as a real person rather than just a famous figure. The most serious challenge came when religious and cultural tensions erupted during a story circle in a diverse London neighborhood. Participants from different faith backgrounds began arguing about whose beliefs were correct. Some people walked out claiming that the discussion was disrespectful to their traditions. Others accused the organizers of promoting dangerous ideas that would undermine social stability. William and Kate spent hours meeting separately with religious leaders from the community trying to understand their concerns. They learned that some people feared story circles would pressure them to compromise their deeply held beliefs or expose their children to inappropriate influences. Others worried that sharing personal information might make them vulnerable to discrimination or judgment. The royal couple worked with faith leaders to develop modified approaches that respected religious boundaries while still creating opportunities for connection. They established separate circles for different age groups and comfort levels. They trained facilitators to recognize when conversations were moving into areas that made people uncomfortable and how to redirect discussions back to universal human experiences. These challenges taught William and Kate that building empathy was more complicated than they had initially realized. Good intentions were not enough. They needed to understand the specific concerns and fears that kept different groups apart. They had to be willing to adapt their methods to work for people with varying cultural backgrounds, comfort levels, and life experiences. But the difficulties also strengthened their commitment to the work. Every obstacle they overcame made the story circle model more robust and inclusive. Every criticism forced them to think more deeply about how to create truly safe spaces for authentic sharing. Every failure taught them lessons that helped future gatherings succeed. Most importantly, they learned that resistance often came from people who had been hurt by previous attempts at community building. Individuals who had experienced discrimination, racism, or religious persecution were naturally cautious about situations that asked them to be vulnerable with strangers. Building trust required patience, consistency, and genuine respect for people's boundaries and concerns. As their story circle initiative grew stronger, William and Kate realized they could use the same principles to address larger social problems that divided entire communities. They began organizing special gatherings that brought together people from different sides of difficult issues to share their personal experiences rather than debate abstract policies. One of their most successful experiments involved police officers and community members in an area where tensions had been building for months. Instead of hosting formal meetings where officials gave presentations and residents asked angry questions, they created story circles where both groups could share their human experiences. Police officers talked about their fears of going to work each day, not knowing if they would come home safely to their families. They shared stories of joining the force to help people that feeling misunderstood and criticized by the communities they served. Some admitted that constant stress and suspicion made them more defensive and less patient than they wanted to be. Community residents shared their own fears about interactions with police. Parents talked about teaching their children to be extra careful and polite during any encounter with officers. Young people described feeling judged and suspected even when they were not doing anything wrong. Elderly residents expressed frustration about crimes in their neighborhood that seemed to go unsolved. But as people shared their stories, something remarkable happened. Both sides began to see each other as fellow human beings rather than representatives of opposing groups. Police officers realized that community members wanted the same things they did: safe neighborhoods where families could thrive, respect for hard work and good intentions, protection from people who caused harm. Community members began to understand that most police officers genuinely cared about helping people and were frustrated by the few bad officers who made their jobs harder. They learned about the difficult decisions officers faced every day and the emotional toll of seeing crime and violence regularly. Kate organized similar gatherings between healthcare workers and patients in hospitals where satisfaction scores were low. Doctors and nurses shared their struggles with long hours, difficult cases, and administrative pressures that kept them from spending enough time with each patient. They talked about their desire to heal people and their frustration when treatment options were limited. Patients shared their fears about being sick and their need to feel heard and understood by medical staff. They talked about feeling rushed during appointments and worried that doctors saw them as problems to solve rather than people with complex lives and concerns. Some admitted being difficult or demanding when they felt scared or ignored. These healthcare story circles led to significant improvements in how medical teams interacted with patients. Staff members who understood patients' emotional needs along with their physical symptoms provided more compassionate care. Patients who appreciated the challenges faced by healthcare workers became more cooperative and understanding. William worked with schools to bring together teachers, parents, and students in story circles that addressed academic and behavioral problems. Teachers shared their passion for education and their frustration with large class sizes, limited resources, and pressure to improve test scores. They talked about staying late to help struggling students and spending their own money on classroom supplies. Parents opened up about their worries that their children were not getting the attention they needed. Some admitted feeling intimidated by school meetings or embarrassed about their own limited education. Others shared their struggles to help with homework they did not understand or to find time for school activities while working multiple jobs. Students surprised adults by sharing mature insights about their learning, challenges, social pressures, and family stress that affected their school performance. Many revealed that behavior problems stemmed from difficulties at home, rather than disrespect for teachers or education. These school story circles improved communication between all three groups. Teachers who understood their students' home situations found more effective ways to support learning. Parents who appreciated teachers' challenges became more supportive of school policies. Students who felt heard by adults showed more respect and engagement in their classes. The success of these specialized story circles attracted attention from government officials who were looking for new approaches to persistent social problems. William and Kate began working with policymakers to incorporate empathy building into discussions about immigration, housing, healthcare, and education reform. They discovered that when legislators and community members shared personal stories rather than arguing about statistics and theories, they found common ground more easily. Immigration debates became more productive when politicians heard directly from both longtime residents and new immigrants about their hopes and fears. Housing discussions improved when developers and tenants shared their perspectives on creating affordable communities. Kate began speaking at international conferences about their story circle model. Representatives from other countries were interested in adapting the approach to their own cultural contexts. The basic principles of authentic sharing, respectful listening, and recognizing common humanity seemed to work across different languages, religions, and political systems. Meanwhile, William worked with business leaders to apply story circle methods in workplaces where employee satisfaction was low or teamwork was poor. Companies found that when managers and workers shared their personal challenges and motivations, they developed better working relationships and more effective collaboration. The model was even adapted for use in schools to reduce bullying and improve classroom behavior. When students shared their real experiences rather than just following disciplinary rules, they developed empathy for classmates they had previously ignored or mistreated. Each new application of story circle principles provided more evidence that the approach could address many different types of social division and conflict. The key was always the same: creating safe spaces where people could share their authentic experiences and discover their shared humanity despite surface differences. William and Kate began documenting these successes not to promote themselves, but to encourage others to try similar approaches in their own communities and organizations. They wanted the story circle model to spread far beyond anything they could personally oversee, because they had learned that empathy was not just a nice idea, but a practical tool for solving real problems. The work of building empathy through story circles changed William and Kate in ways they had not expected when they first sat down with Tom and Amara in that Birmingham community center. Listening to hundreds of personal stories from people with such different life experiences expanded their understanding of what it meant to be human and what it would mean to serve as future leaders of their country. Kate found herself approaching royal duties with completely different awareness than before. When she visited hospitals, she no longer just smiled and shook hands with patients. She remembered the healthcare story circles and understood that the person in the hospital bed might be worried about medical bills, childcare arrangements, or whether family members were getting enough sleep while visiting. During school visits, Kate looked beyond the polished presentations to wonder about the real challenges facing students and teachers. She asked different questions now. Instead of just inquiring about test scores and curriculum, she wanted to know how children felt about learning, what worried them about their futures, and what support they needed most. Her conversations with other parents became deeper and more meaningful. Rather than discussing surface topics like birthday parties and school activities, Kate found herself talking with mothers and fathers about their fears, hopes, and struggles. She realized that parenting was difficult for everyone, regardless of income or social status. William discovered that his capacity for empathy grew stronger through regular practice. The more he listened to people without trying to fix their problems or offer solutions, the more naturally compassion flowed in all his interactions. He became better at reading emotional cues and responding to what people really needed rather than what he thought they should want. His relationship with his own family improved as he applied story circle principles at home. William and Kate began setting aside regular time to check in with each other about their feelings, fears, and dreams without trying to solve each other's problems. They just listened and offered support. Their children grew up with unusual emotional intelligence because they were surrounded by conversations about feelings and human experiences. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis learned early that everyone had struggles and everyone deserved compassion. They became comfortable with differences and skilled at finding common ground with anyone they met. Kate noticed that her anxiety about public speaking and royal duties decreased as her understanding of people deepened. When she knew that audiences were filled with individuals who had their own worries and hopes rather than critics waiting to judge her, she felt more relaxed and authentic during public appearances. She began sharing more personal stories in her speeches. Instead of reading formal prepared remarks about charitable causes, she talked about real people she had met and what their experiences had taught her. Audiences responded much more positively to her honest emotional presentations than they ever had to polished royal rhetoric. William found that his perspective on his future role as king evolved through his empathy work. He began to see leadership not as giving orders or making speeches, but as creating connections between people who might otherwise remain strangers. His job would be to help citizens understand each other across lines of difference that often kept them apart. He started thinking about how story circle principles could be incorporated into official royal functions. Instead of hosting formal state dinners where guests made polite conversation, he imagined gatherings where people from different backgrounds could share meaningful stories that built understanding and cooperation. Both William and Kate became more comfortable with their own vulnerability. They learned that admitting uncertainty and sharing struggles actually made them more effective leaders rather than less. People trusted them more when they were honest about their limitations and committed to learning from others. Kate realized that her role as a future queen was not to be perfect, but to be genuinely caring about the people she would serve. The story circles had taught her that everyone faced difficulties and everyone needed to feel heard and valued. Her job was to use her platform to create more opportunities for human connection and understanding. William understood that effective leadership required deep listening skills. The story circles had shown him that many social problems stemmed from people feeling unheard and misunderstood. Leaders who took time to really listen to different perspectives could find solutions that worked for everyone involved. Their marriage grew stronger as they shared this meaningful work together. Kate and William supported each other through the emotional challenges of hearing difficult stories and dealing with criticism from people who opposed their approach. They celebrated together when story circles succeeded in bringing divided communities together. They also learned to balance the intensity of empathy work with activities that renewed their energy and hope. Spending time in nature playing with their children and enjoying simple pleasures helped them avoid becoming overwhelmed by the pain and struggle they encountered in their community work. The couple developed a deeper spiritual understanding of their purpose in life. They began to see their royal positions not as accidents of birth or symbols of privilege, but as opportunities to serve others in ways that really mattered. Their work had shown them that genuine human connection was one of the most powerful forces for positive change in the world. Kate and William realized that the story circle experience had prepared them for their future roles in ways that traditional royal training never could have. They understood their people not as subjects to rule over, but as fellow human beings deserving of respect, compassion, and genuine care. Most importantly, they had learned that empathy was not just a nice personality trait, but a practical skill that could be developed and strengthened through intentional practice. This gave them confidence that they could continue growing as leaders and as people throughout their lives. Every person they met and every story they heard would teach them something new about the human experience and how to serve others better. 3 years after that first afternoon in Birmingham, William and Kate returned to the same community center for a special celebration. The transformation they witnessed took their breath away. The building itself looked brighter with fresh paint, colorful murals created by local children, and gardens blooming with vegetables and flowers that neighbors tended together. But the real change was in the people. The invisible walls that had once divided the community had been replaced by genuine warmth and connection. Tom arrived early as always, but now he came with Marcus and several other friends who helped him carry baskets of vegetables from their expanded community garden. The small plot behind his house had grown into a neighborhood project that supplied fresh food to dozens of families. Amara walked in wearing hospital scrubs with a confident smile that had not been there 3 years earlier. She had passed her medical certification exams with Mrs. Shen's patient tutoring and now worked as a nurse while completing additional training to practice as a doctor again. Her son Ahmed ran up to Mrs. Chen with a perfect report card and a big hug for the woman who had become like a grandmother to him. The community center buzzed with activity as people from different backgrounds worked together preparing food for the celebration. Teenagers who had once sat apart on their phones were now teaching elderly residents how to use video calling to stay connected with distant family members. Senior citizens shared traditional recipes with young parents who wanted to cook healthy meals for their families. Kate watched Sarah, the engineering student who had helped Mr. Patul with his smartphone during one of their early visits. Sarah was now graduated and working for a company that built affordable housing. She credited her conversations with community elders like Mr. Patel for inspiring her to choose work that served others rather than just seeking the highest salary. William smiled as he observed children playing together in mixed groups that would have been impossible 3 years earlier. Kids switched easily between English and other languages as they played games that combined traditions from different cultures. Their parents chatted comfortably while keeping an eye on the children, no longer clustering in separate groups based on background or religion. The story circles had evolved and multiplied throughout the community. Different groups met regularly to discuss various topics and life stages. New parents gathered to share the challenges and joys of raising children. Teenagers had their own circles where they talked about school pressure, social media stress, and family expectations. Senior citizens met to share memories, wisdom, and support for health challenges. A grief support circle helped people who had lost loved ones find comfort in sharing their experiences. An employment circle connected job seekers with community members who could offer advice, networking opportunities, or recommendations. A health and wellness circle brought together people managing chronic conditions to share practical tips and emotional support. Each circle had trained facilitators who had learned the principles William and Kate had developed. The conversations remained focused on personal experiences rather than political debates. The ground rules of respectful listening and non-judgmental sharing created safety for authentic connection across all kinds of differences. Local government officials had taken notice of the positive changes in the neighborhood. Crime rates had dropped significantly over the 3 years. School attendance and performance had improved. Healthcare outcomes were better as people supported each other through medical challenges. Property values had increased as the area became known as a desirable place to live. But the most meaningful changes could not be measured in statistics. They lived in the relationships that had formed and the understanding that had grown between people who had once been strangers or even suspicious of each other. Families invited neighbors from different backgrounds to share holiday meals. Children played freely without the cautious boundaries their parents had once maintained. Kate received a special gift during the celebration. A group of children from the neighborhood had worked together to create a large drawing that showed people of all ages and backgrounds holding hands in a circle. At the center they had written, "We are all family now," in multiple languages representing the diversity of their community. The artwork captured something profound that William and Kate had learned through their empathy work. Beneath all the surface differences that often divided people lay a deeper truth about shared humanity. Everyone wanted to feel safe and valued. Everyone needed connection and belonging. Everyone had struggles that required compassion and strengths that deserved recognition. As the celebration continued into the evening, William and Kate stepped outside to reflect on how far the community had come. They could hear laughter and conversation in multiple languages flowing through the windows. Children were playing games that mixed traditions from different cultures while their parents planned future projects together. The couple realized that their greatest achievement was not any single program they had created, but rather a fundamental shift in how people saw each other. They had proven that empathy could be taught, practiced, and multiplied. The story circle model was now being used in schools, workplaces, healthcare settings, and communities across multiple countries. Thousands of people had learned that listening without judgment and sharing authentic experiences could break down barriers that seemed impossible to cross. The simple act of seeing others as fellow human beings rather than representatives of different groups had transformed entire communities. William and Kate knew that their work was far from finished. New challenges would always arise as society continued to change and evolve. Immigration would bring new neighbors with different languages and customs. Economic pressures would create stress and competition. Political divisions would test people's commitment to understanding rather than judgment. But they had confidence that the foundation they had helped build would endure. The children who had grown up participating in story circles would carry empathy skills into their adult relationships, careers, and parenting. The adults who had experienced genuine connection across difference would continue creating inclusive communities wherever they lived. The royal couple had learned that lasting change happened not through grand gestures or expensive programs, but through countless small moments of human connection. Every conversation that moved beyond surface politeness to authentic sharing. Every time someone chose curiosity over judgment when meeting someone different. Every instance of reaching out to include rather than exclude. As they prepared to leave the celebration, Kate was approached by a shy 7-year-old girl named Zora, whose family had moved to the neighborhood just 6 months earlier. The child handed Kate a small handmade card with a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands. One figure had yellow hair like Kate, and the other had dark skin and hijab like Zora. On the inside of the card, Zora had written in careful child handwriting, "Thank you for teaching everyone that different can be friends." Kate knelt down to Zora's level and thanked her for the beautiful gift. She told the little girl that she had learned just as much from children like her about what it meant to welcome others with open hearts. This moment crystallized everything William and Kate had discovered through their empathy work. Children naturally possessed the openness and acceptance that adults often lost through years of social conditioning and painful experiences. But those qualities could be reclaimed and strengthened through intentional practice and community support. Walking back to their car, William and Kate passed the community garden where Tom and Marcus were showing a group of new residents how to prepare soil for spring planting. They saw Mrs. Chen helping Amara's youngest daughter with reading homework, while other children played nearby. They witnessed Sarah explaining engineering concepts to teenagers who were interested in science careers. These scenes represented the multiplication effect of empathy. Each person who had experienced genuine acceptance and understanding in the story circles went on to create similar connections in their daily lives. The circles had ended, but the circle of caring continued to expand, touching more lives with each passing day. The legacy William and Kate left in Birmingham was not a building or program that could be dismantled, but a living network of relationships and a community culture that valued human connection above all else. They had proven that even in a world increasingly divided by fear and misunderstanding, it was possible to choose love, curiosity, and compassion. Their story circle model would continue spreading to new communities and countries, carried forward by ordinary people who had discovered the extraordinary power of truly seeing and hearing each other. The future they envisioned was one where every neighborhood school, workplace, and family practiced the simple revolutionary act of recognizing the humanity in everyone they met. As their car pulled away from the community center, Kate looked back one more time at the building where their journey had begun. Through the lit windows, she could see people of all ages and backgrounds, still talking and laughing together. The sight filled her with hope that this was just the beginning of a much larger transformation that would ripple outward for generations to come.